So welcome everybody. Al Iverson here. Today in our Valimail webinar, I'm going to talk about rejections and deferrals. This cool new stuff that Google is sharing in DMARC reporting. And before we kick things off, a couple of housekeeping notes. Yes, we will share the recording. So we'll send a follow-up email with a link to the recording. We put it on YouTube. It'll be ungated. It'll be very easy to get access to that and share it with your friends. If you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A. Assuming that I set it up properly, you should be able to leave questions. You can always leave feedback and thoughts in the chat as well. We will do our best to keep up with those along the way. As you saw here, this is what we're going to cover today. And we'll sort of kick it off with intros. So as I said, I'm Al Iverson. I lead our industry and community efforts here at Valimail. What does that mean? That means working with other people in the email ecosystem to help keep everything safe and secure, to understand sender best practices, to be able to successfully get mail delivered to the inbox, but also to prevent users and email recipients against phishing and spoofing. I've also got with me Scott Ziegler, who is our VP of Product here at Valimail. Scott, care to introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, great to see you today. Thanks for joining us. I am the VP of Product, as Al said, what's that mean? That means I get to work with our product managers, our customers. I also get to work with our engineering team to set priorities, what we build, how we pull all of this together. But at least for today's topic, it also means I get that chance to chat directly with folks like Google or Microsoft or Yahoo and talk about these sender requirements or even nudge in some cases to put some of this data into DMARC reports and make sure that we're delivering it out for folks to see.
So thank you, Scott. This is one of those webinars where Scott and I are going to have a lot of fun with this data. I hope you guys enjoy it in the audience as well. But if you don't, I'm sorry. I'm still going to have fun either way because it's kind of cool stuff to look at. So let's get right into it. So I sometimes dive right in and just start assuming everybody knows what all the acronyms mean. So I want to set it up here with what does it mean when we say BFCM, or Black Friday and Cyber Monday, the day after Thanksgiving, the U.S. holiday, right? That's one of the biggest shopping days of the holiday season, the Christmas season, historically. And that continues today with online marketing and Black Friday being a very big, very important marketing day for online retailers, the day after Thanksgiving, leading into Cyber Monday, the Monday following, and even Giving Tuesday, and even that whole, some people call it Cyber Week, with lots of specials and deals, and a lot of email marketers thinking of this as the big game. Like it's the most important time of the year. This is the time they've been prepping for the whole time. So this is what we're going to talk about today in the context of Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Well, so when we talk about BFCM, that's what we're talking about. Mailbox providers find this to be their busy season too. The Yahoos of the world, the Gmails of the world. If you didn't know, you might keep this in mind for next year. Every year, I recycle this little tip: adjust your sending time ever so slightly. A friend of mine at one of the biggest mailbox providers told me this. Everybody sets their campaigns to launch automatically at the top or the bottom of the hour, right? At 0 past or 30 past the hour. So everybody's sort of struggling to connect to Yahoo, to Gmail, to Microsoft all at once. If you adjust that by 3 minutes back, 7 minutes forward, 4 minutes back, 6 minutes forward, you actually sidestep a lot of the congestion. So the mailbox providers are struggling during this period too. And if you can figure out ways that you can help avoid adding to their struggle by sending it off moments, and of course sending wanted and good mail, making sure that it's actually stuff that people want, not just digging as deep as you can and throwing it all over the fence and hoping for the best. You are doing a good thing there if you can sort of focus those efforts to send wanted mail to people who've actually signed up for it. So what has changed? Now, Black Friday, Cyber Monday is itself not new. Black Friday has been around forever as a concept for a good long time. And in the concept of online marketing, this has been around for a long time as well. But what changed this year, something is different and new this year, and that is more mail is getting rejected or deferred for being non-compliant with modern sender requirements than ever before. The sender requirements themselves are not entirely new. They were first announced by Yahoo and Google in October 2023. Modern sender requirements that sort of translated what we all kind of knew, or a lot of deliverability people kind of knew as common best practices, things that were perhaps unspoken to some degree, but known that if you did them, you were putting your best foot forward. Those that were just sort of understood to be a best practice in the past have been transitioned to being mandated, written, published sender requirements. And so that again, that's a couple years past now. But what's different this year is Microsoft and Google have both stepped up enforcement and have both moved to block messages at a much greater scale when non-compliant compared to years past. Microsoft announced updated sender requirements in April and moved very quickly to rejections starting in May. So if you had problems with email authentication, other compliance metrics, RFC compliance, all that happy stuff, all of the checks and things you're supposed to be doing, Microsoft very quickly started blocking lots of that mail back in May. Google announced something similar in November. Now, again, the announced requirements from Google were already there. That's not what was announced in November, but what was announced is that they were going to start basically applying that compliance hammer in a much more broad fashion than they had been doing in years past. So, right as we're on the cusp of Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Google said, we're going to start rejecting more mail than we've been doing in the past. And so that's what led Scott and I to sort of look at this. And what we see in the data is rejections are significantly up. We'll share some of that data and walk you through what we see and why that is, and some use cases, some examples where it reminds us that it's so important to not be asleep at the wheel when it comes to monitoring your infrastructure, whether that be you as your own company marketing, setting up, running your own servers in the cloud, making sure everything has proper DNS, whether you be a marketing client of an email service provider platform, or whether you be involved in deliverability or operations for an ESP or CRM platform. We're going to highlight some examples here where if you are not monitoring for whether or not your infrastructure is properly configured, you are going to have trouble. And we saw a lot of that this season, and a lot of otherwise legitimate mail ended up rejected as a result. And the big takeaway, and we'll touch on this a little bit more too, is that DMARC is the starting point for all of this, not the ending point. Like if you look at the sender requirements, SPF, DKIM, DMARC, a lot of people check the boxes. They say, okay, we've got it, we're fine. Oh, DMARC should pass just fine if you've got SPF or DKIM. But again, the mailbox providers have taken it to the next level, making it a starting point, not an ending point. Microsoft, for example, requires that bulk senders have SPF and DKIM in place, not just one or the other. So it's another example of, in the past, one thing might have been good enough. If you didn't check all the boxes, at least you checked one of them. You're probably going to do well enough to get mail delivered, to get it at least through the edge. That is no longer the case. What we're seeing now is that if you are not compliant to the letter, to the extended letter, to the new level of all these requirements, you are going to get that mail rejected. It is not going to get delivered. So what are we basing our data on? Back in August, Google did something cool. I think that was August, right, Scott? Was that August or July?
It was the very end of July, the data started showing up.
So Google started putting SMTP rejection information in their DMARC aggregate reporting. So they send out, what is DMARC reporting? It is these XML formatted files. They're sent via email. You publish a DNS record and for your DMARC settings, and in those DMARC settings, in that DMARC record, you say you specify a destination. Where should those reports be mailed to? And that is the starting step toward what every Valimail customer does to be able to get DMARC reporting, right? The reports come to us, we ingest them, we generate reporting. The new angle here is that Google has added SMTP rejection info for a lot of instances in there. And in the past, this rejection information was only available via mail server logs. It's stuff that the sending platform inherently was the only place where that information was surfaced. Now, a sending platform could choose to float it up to the client level, to choose to build reporting around it, but it also, in a lot of cases, just confused clients of email service provider platforms. So a lot of them will just sort of summarize or give high level categories and counts of those rejections. And that's just the rejections. It's even more complicated when you talk about deferrals. You think about mailbox providers that defer messages, give 4XX SMTP responses, meaning they're not allowing the mail to go through, but they're saying you can try again later. Mailbox providers do that a lot more now than they used to in years past, Gmail being the prime example of that. And that information is very difficult for an email service provider to surface to their clients, and in some cases leads to confusion and is not always easy to understand. I know the platform that I worked on for years, it was very difficult to float visibility of deferrals. SMTP deferrals to our customers. So that was something that's already difficult to get visibility into. But now with this new reporting, the new data that Google has added to their DMARC reports, you get insight here in a way that you didn't have before, in a place you didn't have before, a new opportunity to actually dive down in this and see what mail is getting deferred under your domain, regardless of what email send platform you use. But giving you almost like a second fire alarm, a second set of monitoring to be able to look at it and see what's going on with that mail. Anyway, long story short, we roll this up and share this with you in our sender requirements failure report. That's why this is on the screen here. It's just a quick example screenshot of what kind of data that Google sends back that we then float up to our clients and show them and help them, give them visibility at a broad organizational level of rejections when sending to Gmail.
Hey Al, small plug just for folks to remember. If you aren't using Monitor, you can use Monitor. It's free to sign up. Go find it on the Valimail website and you can point your rural reports. If you want to see this type of data, I know we'll talk about that a little later, but this is something that is available. It's in the Monitor product. You're welcome to use it. We'd love your feedback on it as well.
Thank you, sir. I am going to put the Q&A on the screen here in case that comes up while we're chatting. Then I'm going to stop wiggling the mouse because everybody hates to watch a recording later where the mouse just goes driving around the screen. So I'll try to get better about that. So here's what we're talking about. Here's what the data starts to show. Now, this again, this came into availability at the end of July or at the start of August. There's when we were first able to start capturing and summarizing this. And we saw a lot of mail right out of the chute. What is that? 70 million messages rejected, or excuse me, deferred initially because of that. But then you see it kind of goes up and up and up. And now the deferrals sort of calmed down a little bit in November, but it's still huge. Calm down means nearly 75 million emails were delayed because of some kind of non-compliance. Even worse, about the same number, just under 75 million, were rejected by Gmail. These are specifically, again, this is reporting of attempts to send mail to Gmail rejected because of non-compliance for any one of a number of different reasons, from all shown in our sample data here. So just across the 12,000 plus domains in our sample data, a ton of mail was rejected. So you can see those rejections going up over the 90 days leading up through the end of November. The reasons for that. This is most of the different reasons. I think we see all of these. There might be one or two more. There's actually, if you look at this Google resource page with the breakdown of the SMTP rejections, there are a lot more different kinds. So we tried to sort of summarize this down to what we think actually is showing up in the data. And you see a lot of them are very specifically related to email authentication, SPF failures, lack of DKIM failures, um, both for deferrals, again, codes starting with four. The fours and fives are sort of email server language, email server error codes or status codes. Five means we're not going to accept this message, go back and log it as bounce. It's very common for mailbox providers to reject mail with a 571 code, which I think is the second from the bottom one here. That's a very common spam block or catch-all type of block. So if you've been an email marketer for a while and you're actually familiar with bounces, you've definitely seen that one before. But there's all these different ones here that have different things, right? And so some of them are deferrals. Again, mail is temporarily paused, not allowed through. Those start with a four. And then in a lot of cases, mail, when it's rejected, it's going to have that five code there for all of these different reasons. A lot of them, again, there's a mix of stuff. Some of it is authentication related, some of it is RFC compliance related, or like what that means is basically it mean a lot of things. What happens most often is stuff like malformed headers that are built improperly, or too many headers. Like, for example, you're only supposed to have one subject line header in an email message. You're only supposed to have one from address in an email header. That's specified in the relevant RFC, the specification documents for how internet email works. And spammers used to exploit some sort of edge cases where stuff used to go through, like if it had a double subject line or if it had a double from address, it might actually go through. And then the mailbox provider might sort of twist themselves into a knot trying to figure out how do we display that in the UI. And so some funny stuff could happen. And so spammers try to exploit that and add a second subject line, add a second from address to try to stick their message or their link or their content into an email message. So that's just one example of why Gmail and others have to go to this length to try to reject this stuff. It's to prevent spammers from driving their spam through to your inbox via one of these loopholes. So there's all these different reasons here, right? Again, some of them are spam related, some of them are specification related, a lot of them are authentication related, some of them are infrastructure related. We're going to touch on that a little bit more too. That 5.7.25 code blocked due to lack of pointer record or a forward or reverse DNS problem. We'll touch on more on what that means specifically in a second here, because that is one that came up a ton. There's a lot of mail that was rejected because of that. We're going to touch more on that. So again, trying to just simplify it here. Here's the main things that we see. That last number of that code, like 571, 5725, 5727, all these different things for what is TLS. If you don't know, that's transport layer security. That effectively refers to encryption of the connections when mail servers are talking to each other. In this context, Gmail really pushed the industry to more broadly adopt TLS by highlighting messages with a big, scary warning icon if messages were transmitted without that encryption in place. And so it's long been a best practice to ensure that you have TLS working properly. And again, in the context of Google sort of translating or transitioning these things from understood but perhaps not well documented best practices to what are now mandated, published, absolutely necessary requirements. TLS is just one of many examples of that where, yeah, it was good to have it a few years ago. And at some point they drove broader adoption by adding a scary warning about it. But now you absolutely have to have it and it has to work properly or you're not going to get that mail delivered. So the easy ones, from my perspective, the simple rejections, your SPF is broken. There you go. You can see there we had a big spike of them, and especially in October. Over 30 million messages rejected because specifically sender policy framework was not working properly. Now, it did calm down a little bit in November, but it's still calm down still means a lot of messages, right? If you look
Yeah,
at it here,
let me correct one thing here because I
yeah,
think you said that's 30 million that were rejected. What I like to
sorry,
think of in this
deferred.
is those 400 errors and those 500 errors. That's sort of a warning message if you're getting a 400. It means it's deferred, but you aren't necessarily getting blocked yet. What I would read in this slide is there's a lot more warnings happening in October. And if y'all remember, Google said, hey, guess what? It's November, and we are going to start enforcing this a bit more. And guess what happened? Less warnings, more failures. And so
Yeah.
that's just something to be aware of as you're starting to see this trend. Is I know, and I know this because I've chatted with the folks over at Gmail. They're giving folks every opportunity to see issues as best as they possibly can and a chance to fix them before they start blocking your mail. But if things aren't getting fixed, this is a slide that shows that more things are moving over towards being blocked than just being warned.
Love it. Thank you, Scott. So that's SPF. Similar deal with DKIM. If you didn't have domain keys identification, uh, identified mail in place, DKIM in place, the most common email authentication protocol, same deal. You saw a spike in deferrals in October. Like Scott said, it was sort of the warning sign for, hey, what's going to happen next? These are the whole point of this is for Google to give warning to email senders that, hey, something is wrong. So that's deferrals, and here's rejections of that. It's not the many millions, it's not 60 million deferrals versus only 100,000 rejections, but that is still a significant amount of mail right there that was deferred because of warning and rejected because of misconfiguration. This is mail that, again, if something wasn't broken, probably would have been okay and delivered otherwise. Spam rejections. Here you go. Oh, sorry. I thought I had an arrow here. I don't have an arrow here, but you can see it grow for the 90 days up to and through the end of November, where Gmail rejections are spiking here, spam and other. And I think a lot of that is going to be specifically reputation related, right? Because marketers have been known to get a little aggressive around Black Friday and Cyber Monday. People dig deeper into their historical lists, their historical data. They send to subscribers that they may have otherwise suppressed for the rest of the times of the year, and they're not mailing them. And so, what does that tell us? It tells us that Gmail is specifically rejecting a lot of mail. Look at that, 3 million messages just in our little sample of the 12,000 odd domains that we see here. Um, but there are even bigger segments in some of these other rejections that I want to show you. So while I do think this is significant, kind of want to see where it goes specifically, and we're going to talk more about pointer failures and other stuff here in a little bit. I talked about TLS, transport layers security, the encryption that email servers use when they talk to each other to make sure that bad guys cannot sniff the email traffic out of the internet and do bad stuff with it. You might say, well, who cares if it's mostly bulk mail? It's not like somebody's going to try to hackers are not going to try to sneak and steal your coupon code. But the fact of the matter is it's important for the email ecosystem to be secure. And that means that as many email senders as possible should be encrypting their mail and making sure that everything is up to security best practice standards. And this one is crazy. How many messages were rejected for TLS failures? Huge spike. It's still low numbers, but still a very significant spike of email messages rejected in November 2025. Again, I think that's a case of probably some of these senders were not sending for a while and wanted to hit the go button for Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and things were not configured correctly in a way where it might not have impacted them in the past. Because again, Gmail amped up their enforcement efforts, specifically starting in November. Kind of a neat transition here too, where yeah, deferrals went down, but what's happening after that? The roll rejections went way up, and so is there some messages here that maybe they still got through, but could they be getting dinged for their spam score if TLS is not configured properly? I'd be a little worried about that. Lack of alignment. So what does alignment mean? This is what alignment means. This means the alignment is where the from domain in the visible from header matches one or both of the authentication header domains. So if SPF alignment means that the domains match between your return path, the header that SPF is checked against by the mailbox providers. It's actually part of the SMTP transaction, ends up as a header. It's not transmitted as a header. I'm sure somebody will give me a hard time about it if I call it a header too much. But the point of it at the end of the day is when you look at the headers after the message is delivered, you have alignment if the domain matches in there between those two. That's SPF alignment. DKIM alignment. There's a hidden header for the DKIM signature. It'll have a domain in there. DKIM aligns if that domain matches what's in the visible from address. There is a concept of strict alignment versus um, relaxed alignment. So relaxed alignment means subdomains are good enough. You can have email.example.com matches example.com. That's good enough to call it aligned under relaxed alignment. Strict means it has to exactly match. Long story short here, there's a lot of mail getting deferred because of that lack of alignment. If you and here's where it could all go wrong. These messages could have been authenticated. They could have an SPF record properly in place for the return path domain. They could have a domain, a DKIM signature set up, and so there's an actual passing DKIM signature based on what's in that hidden DKIM header. But if neither of those align with what's in the visible from address, they're doing something wrong. They're telling Google that, hey, nothing in the from address. The from address is we're not doing anything to the email message to prove that the from address is actually the entity who originated that email. And here's Gmail saying, hey, we're not going to let that through immediately. We're going to pause. We're going to give you a warning to try to tell you that something is going wrong there. You are not following best practices. This is something that, again, years ago, man, I've been doing this email thing for a while now, right? So good 20 plus years. And years ago, even when SPF started to become a thing, and even before DKIM started to become a thing, alignment was not always required. And that was one of the trickier things that led to things like DMARC, because we needed better alignment related authentication protections to protect against phishing and spoofing. But before all of that, this kind of mail would have got delivered just fine. It would have gotten through. It would not have gotten rejected. So here are examples where if emails are authenticated but not aligned, you're going to have problems getting that mail delivered.
And
Tara raises a good question.
there's a question, but Al, I wanted to add one more piece, and we can touch on the question that came through from Tara. Um, the interesting one that I've seen, at least in the data on this, is there is a corresponding 5.7.32. I believe there's a code in the Google list, but we haven't seen it yet in the wild. So what I suspect is likely happening on some of these messages is they might not get a 5.7.32 rejection, but I'm gonna assume Google is not putting these in the inbox because they have said very clearly, even if you had a P equals none policy, we're gonna look at putting messages into the junk folder, into the spam folder. So these are the sorts of things that they might not result in a rejection, but they could absolutely result in huge deliverability issues. So just something to keep in mind. Again, I like to look at this as my analogy when I worked in the deliverability world is deliverability was a bit of, reading tea leaves and understanding how you might want to adjust things. This isn't tea leaves, this is science. You're getting some very clear signals of exactly what you need to do or change or adjust, and you're also seeing some patterns that are showing how if you aren't adjusting those, they will turn into something bigger or different. This is just one of those examples where you can see the specific types of messages, you can see the campaigns, and you have a chance to go fix all of this. You don't have to guess. Just fix it.
Thank you, Scott. And so to Tara's point, she asked, do these deferrals for alignment turn into a bounce, or are we seeing them defer on the first try and accept on a retry? And that's more or less what Scott is alluding to there, is that it's a little bit hard to tell. But Tara, I think it's likely that they're probably being accepted on retries, because if they're never being accepted, you are just going to have queues fill up, and eventually that transitions into what a mailbox or what an ESP would call a hard bounce, right? If a soft bounce goes for the whole length until it's expired out of the queue, goes nowhere, it's going to end up just getting logged as a bounce, nothing's happening. But to Scott's point, if and when it is getting accepted on that retry, which we suspect it is in these cases, Where's the disposition of the mail? Where's the mail being dropped into? What folder is it going into? And I would be worried that it's probably not always going to land in the inbox if it's failing these checks and getting deferred because of it. And so, right, Scott, that's ultimately your point here is that even though they haven't transitioned to outright blocking these, it's probably not good for your sort of spam score to be failing these checks.
Whether it's spam score, just the idea of think of your end users and you're trying to reach them. These are likely not going to get delivered to the inbox. And again, this gets into that nuance of a P equals none policy under sender requirements is not exactly a P equals none policy like it used to be, and they get treated a little differently. And I am going to emphasize one more piece. I know we touched on it earlier, but this is just Google's data. Google's the only one who's making this data public. Thank you, Google, for that. But this also is going to be impacting you at Microsoft. This is also going to be impacting you at Yahoo. Y'all can see this if you can get into your SMTP logs. We don't have access to the full SMTP logs. So if you want to go track some of these down, look for these error codes. Look and see if you see a 250 on a retry that's coming through later. But just keep that in mind of we're using the data and showing some of this so you can see global trends because I think for a lot of folks, maybe at an ESP level, you'll see a bigger picture. But if you're here as a sender, you might want to know if you ever run into this, how could you attack these sorts of issues or address them? And the answer, honestly, is just keep looking at those logs. But I'll remind you all, and then we'll get into some of the PTR stuff that I know is where we're seeing the bulk of the issues. We haven't even got there yet. But just a reminder, SMTP logs are not always easy to get either. And so you might have issues that are happening at a third-party sending service that doesn't even allow you to see your SMTP logs. At least in your DMARC report now from Google, you're going to get these signals. So use these signals, dig in wherever you can on them, and do your best to fix issues before those 400s turn into 500s later.
Thank you, sir. And now, the star of the story, pointer failures. Pointer a pointer or PTR record in DNS refers to the mapping of IP addresses to host names. When you look up your host name, you look up www.valimail.com, you're looking to find forward DNS or an A record that points to an IP address that leads to a web server that lets you find the website and load the website for Valimail. That's how sort of the address book of the internet DNS works for forward DNS. The flip side of that, if you think of it more like a reverse phone lookup where you have the phone number, or in this case, an IP address, and you want to find out what the host name is, that's a PTR, a pointer record. And so everybody that sets up infrastructure has an opportunity at some way, at some level, the platform or the provider or the upstream or somebody manages reverse DNS, manages the configuration or delegation of those pointer records for that are host names, that when you look up an IP address, you get a host name. So if you look up IP 1.2.3.4, you find out that maps to www.valimail.com. That is a pointer lookup, a reverse DNS lookup. So when those are missing or don't match, that is effectively a spam sign. And the reason for that is it's sort of like driving a car around without a license plate on it. Most cars have license plates. Most people who are doing things right pay their car registration and they show that off. They know it's required. They put that on the plate. So if you see a car that is driving around without a license plate on it, on either end, then you might be more suspicious of that. And certainly the police are going to be more suspicious of that. Every once in a while, it can happen to a good person. A license plate could fall off or get stolen. It could be through no fault of their own. But ultimately, if people are driving around without identification of who they are, whether it be their license plate or their host name for DNS, for pointer records, that is suspicious. That is questionable. And that's what's happening here. And that's because spammers that hack into servers to relay spam don't always have a choice of whether or not they can control the DNS for those servers. So when spammers take over unused servers, those servers could be much more likely to not have these DNS records set up. Thus, long story short, lack of IP address settings, rather lack of pointer records for these IP addresses is a spam site. And that's what mailbox providers think when they see mail from servers that don't have properly configured DNS. So you can see it ramp up there the last 90 days. There's a little bit of a bump there when it first started including rejections, when Gmail first started including these rejection information in DMARC reporting. But look at it go way up there from September to October to November to more than 60 million rejections, specifically because of that failed DNS. And this is stuff that if you're using an email service provider, it should be configured properly, right? If you're using whether it be an email service provider, cloud provider, MTA service, whatever, all of this stuff should be properly configured. So that's where it's sort of scary here. And that's where we start talking about where things can go wrong when you're not monitoring for that sort of thing. And away we go. Right. Look at that specific there. And we were kind of surprised to see this. I was surprised to see this. I was assuming there'd be more spam related rejections or other types of rejections or authentication failures, because there's still a fair number of people out there who don't know that they need to authenticate everything properly. Everything needs to pass SPF and DKIM. But it turns out this was the sort of the big monster there, where there so much mail got rejected because of DNS infrastructure issues.
All right, so Al's going to take a sip of coffee. My turn to dive in. We're going to go through a couple case studies, and I want to just call out. We are a little over. If you signed up and you thought this was going to be a half-hour webinar, we looked at all the data we had and we said, "There's no way we're going to get through this in a half hour." So we're definitely recording it. Apologies if anybody did have to drop. I don't know that we're going to need a full hour on this, but we're going to take a couple more minutes to dive into some of these specific case studies. And Bjorn, I saw your comment in the chat, and I want to hold off until we got to some of these case studies to explain what we're seeing. Because in some situations, I know you question, well, how many attempts were there? How many emails were sent? For some of these customers, it was nearly all their email, and that's going to be super frustrating. For other customers, it was a small blip that they might not even have noticed. But there's still rejections, and we can talk about what some of those specific cases were. But here's case study one. This one actually is a department store. So this is a department store that is obviously going to be fairly reliant, at least I assume, fairly reliant on their Black Friday, Cyber Monday campaigns. And if we go back in the data, we can see that there really isn't much signal here. I believe on the 12th that there was a one message that had something, but it wasn't necessarily going to drive you to, hey, you had an issue. And this customer is using a reputable ESP. So they didn't try to do this all on their own. They were sending things through an ESP and they said, hey, here we are. We've prepped. We've got our campaigns ready. We're going to go. And across the 6 day period, basically every single email that they were sending to Gmail from their domain got a 500 code because things were not set up properly. And this was actually related to the PTR records that Al was just chatting through. I don't know how they were feeling about this, but I know how I would feel if I was in this sort of situation. One, if I'm the ESP, I sure hope you saw this and fixed this and corrected this. What I can say is it didn't happen for at least 6 days, which meant it not only impacted what they sent on Black Friday, but it also impacted what they sent on Cyber Monday. If I'm the customer, I'm probably wondering what the heck happened and why we aren't seeing the spike that we would usually see. Now, keep in mind, this attribution's hard. What's driving what and where these all come together. This likely is pushing you to a website to go buy things. I don't think this is going to completely tank their entire holiday season, but this is impactful nonetheless. It ended up being millions and millions of messages, and there's even another angle to this, which we'll talk about. I think you all know if you work with an ESP, you're paying for those messages. And so this is a lot of money you also spent to send these messages out that never reach the intended user. And keep in mind, we're only seeing the Gmail side. It's very likely that Microsoft also blocked these for the same exact reason. So if we think about this, what's the takeaway? The takeaway is you should be checking this. If you're an ESP, definitely check this for your customers. If you are not an ESP and you're just somebody leveraging one, don't assume that it's all going to be fine and dandy. And if we want to bring it back to the deliverability message, this is almost like the basics. We're right back to infrastructure. Don't assume that everything is okay because you didn't change anything. The rules have changed and things are being watched a little more closely. I don't know, Al, anything else that you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, I just want to hit that one more time to reinforce it that this is a case of infrastructure not being monitored. That's what it seems like to me. And it just highlights whether you are a client of a platform or you run your own platform or you work for a platform that services marketers or other bulk email senders, there is a failure in some cases to monitor your DNS infrastructure. That's something that has to get fixed.
All right, so let's go to case study number two, and this chart's going to look a little different. In this one, I was able to just go ahead and take a quick screenshot out of the product. So this is the sort of view that you would see. Now, this one is not specifically to Black Friday, Cyber Monday, but I still think it's an interesting one to talk about where you can start to see some issues, even though, again, this is a customer working with an ESP, migrating a whole bunch of their data. And in this case, it was 28 million messages that were having issues with DKIM. Now, luckily, this was happening at that time that Google hadn't ramped up enforcement. So these are just warnings. These were 400s. These were deferrals, but they still passed DMARC because their SPF was set up properly. They still got to those customers, but they were having issues in this particular moment. And I know it seems like this was resolved quickly, but again, this is one that ran across 3 days. And across 3 different days, there's a day of no send. So it was actually 2 different days. I would have hoped it would have been seen or fixed or resolved a little sooner. So on this particular case, again, we're in a world where I hate to keep saying this, but don't assume everything is fine. I think it's always good to check, to validate, to double check. I mean, this is again a lot of messages that were impacted. And this is not just a did I pass DMARC? It's one of the reasons that these types of codes are even more important to understand now, because in the world of Google sender requirements and Microsoft and Yahoo, all of this is required now. And again, Al was giving them the benefit of the doubt of here's why and why these things are in place. All of that's great, but reality is they're required. So even if you don't agree with it, and even if you don't like it, your mail's not going to get delivered if you can't live up to these. So that's my quick takeaway, Al. I don't know if you had any other thoughts on this, but I wanted to throw that out. It's always good to double check. Now, in this case, again, the customer was good. I know who they were working with. I actually had a chance to chat with the folks on the ESP side. They got this all sorted quickly, but you're still in that spot of what if you were working with a different ESP who wasn't able to find this quicker? And we'll show some examples of those types of situations, which, again, just for me, it breaks my heart because I know folks are working hard to get messages out and get things sent to customers, and it's not always caught by the ESP. Go ahead, Al. Anything you want to add?
And to your point, it wasn't just Gmail that had a problem with this. This is just we only have visibility into Gmail. So there was more messages than this affected. Again, comes back to monitoring. And yeah, this one does break my heart too, because I've helped set up a ton of clients on multiple email service provider and marketing cloud platforms across all of the different the brands, the chimps, the clouds, the whatever. And it's tough to get it right. It's still there's a lot of steps involved in setup. Automation has not taken away the need for QA and monitoring. And so it's just so important that you've got to monitor. You've got to actually look at what's going on, test to make sure that everything's authenticating correctly and everything's working correctly, and don't just assume. DNS is not set it and forget it, especially in the case of a platform transition.
All right, and I've got two more examples that I'm just going to show. We don't have a kind of deeper analysis, but again, this is just to show that there are lots of places that this is happening. So in this example, again, you can all probably start to guess, well, let's see. I see a whole bunch of big red spikes that are always at the end of the month or beginning of the month. End of the month, the beginning of the month. End of the month, the beginning of the month. What if I told you this was a utility company? What kind of mail do you assume this would be if all of their bulk sends are happening at the end of the month, the beginning of the month, and they're all being blocked at Gmail? I put money on this as somebody sending out their electronic statements out to the world. And guess what? They don't have their DNS configured properly. And these are all being blocked to the tune of, across this 3 month period or close to 4 month period, 70 million messages. And I'm going to guess if you look at the end there, there's one sort of in the middle. This was not my utility company here in Colorado, I can tell you that. But I know what they always do is when you get to that kind of, hey, we're heading into winter, here's just a quick update to get you ready. as we're heading into winter, here's how you'll make sure that you have got your furnace set on up and all of these other sorts of things. But this is the sort of stuff that, again, just absolutely breaks my heart because here are folks that probably aren't getting their utility bills. And sure, they know to go log in and they probably have a pattern. It's not like people are just going to be delinquent and not pay their utility bills, but these are a lot of emails that just need a little bit of tweaks, configuration changes, and these are going to sail right through and reach users. And by the way, I know we're using all of these examples just so everybody knows, everybody that we're talking about in here, we're also reaching out to them separately and kind of helping them work through this, whether they were on our free platform or our paid platform. We just want to make sure that their mail is going to work properly and get to folks. But this one, I will highlight, was not an ESP. This is an internal infrastructure. So it's also a little tricky. Again, they weren't using this. This is probably more for transactional mail than it was for marketing. And then the next one, this is one that actually is marketing and an ESP. So again, this one, slightly different scenario. You can tell very clear pattern of how they're mailing, who they're mailing. This was one of those companies that you get asked to do surveys and they send you out surveys and then you actually get paid for completing those surveys. So that means somebody is, somewhere thinking that their Gmail address is supposed to be getting surveys and they're going to complete those surveys and they're going to get, some money every single month as supplemental income for doing these types of surveys. And guess what? No, now they're not getting it. I am happy to say this one, while it took a little bit of time, was caught by the ESP and was resolved. So that's why you see it basically disappear as we get into December. But it still went on, and we only have data going back to late July, early August. Who knows how long this has actually been happening? Now, this is another one of them where it's likely falling a little under the radar, maybe, with all of the emails and everything else that they're sending. And there are more examples of this. I don't have the slide here, but yeah, there was another customer that we're trying to help out, and we said, I can see exactly where you've got your PTR record is not set up properly. And they reached out to their ESP, and their ESP said, "Oh, I think that's a delegated subdomain to billing dot their domain." And I was like, woof. You're right back in that world where your marketing messages probably looked great, but all of your billing messages are not getting sent out properly and potentially not even reaching the folks you're trying to reach. And so when you put some of these large numbers into play, this goes back to where Bjorn was asking, well, out of how many? For some of these customers, it's nearly all their mail that they were sending over a short period of time. That was the DKIM issue. That was some of those first issues. For other customers, these are lingering and kind of flying under the radar, but still significant amounts of mail. I was chatting with Al. I mean, we're not here, we're not marketers in the same way, but we do know what the rack rates are for sending messages, and we do know that people are paying for these messages. Even that alone, there's thousands or tens of thousands of dollars that are basically being thrown down the drain just because something's not being watched and monitored that could be as little as a 5-minute change and resolve a lot of these issues. So that is my takeaway on this. Again, as Al said, we're going to go in the weeds. I get this might have been a little nerdy, a little geeky in some of the SMTP logs, but this is stuff that there's things to fix here. And like I said, it's not some sort of tea leaves or voodoo or anything else. This is science. There's exactly messages here that tell you exactly where to look and how to resolve these. And everybody should be looking at this and everybody should be fixing these. And yes, fix it once and it should be good, but you can keep monitoring just in case something else breaks down the road.
Love it. And pay attention and monitor. That's the key here. And another takeaway here, again, it starts with DMARC. It doesn't end with DMARC. Deliverability folks, myself included, are often guilty of going check, check, check. SPF, DKIM, DMARC, boom, we got it, we're done. P equals none's good enough. We don't care if SPF aligns, whatever. Fine. But now you're seeing instances where Microsoft, Gmail, and others are requiring more than just the bare minimum there. What was okay even a couple of years ago for that is not okay now. And so people are running afoul, especially in the case of Microsoft, where mail would pass DMARC but fail SPF, right? Because again, it's DMARC passes based on SPF or DKIM or both. It doesn't have to be both. It's great if it is. But in the past, if you passed DKIM, failed SPF, you could have still passed DMARC. The DMARC spec allows it. Technically, it's still the case today, but a lot of the mailbox providers are getting really very particular about that. Microsoft's a perfect example of they all have to pass if you're sending any significant volume of mail. So don't just base it on what you set up before should be good enough. Make sure you're monitoring, make sure you're testing, make sure everything is passing all of the different checks. Otherwise, you're going to be having trouble here. And do you even know? Are you looking at those bounces? So again, SPF, DKIM, DMARC, mandatory. Review that DMARC reporting. Think of it again as a second fire alarm. It's another way to look at bounces beyond what you might already get from your email service provider. Not all of them give you access to that. Some of them might even give it to you, but it might be raw data and it's very hard to sort of roll up and synthesize. We actually do have counts and summaries, and based on what we get back in the aggregate reporting from Google, it's very easy to sort of break that down and see the numbers. Like Scott showed you there, some of those examples were literally screenshots from our app. So that's how we can help. And all the other best practice stuff there too. I'm not going to read it to you. You should know all this stuff by now, darn it. And if you don't, you can reach out and I'll be happy to talk you through it.
Al, I'm going to give one last bit that just came through in the Q&A, and I want to make sure this is also clear. One of the other great things about signing up for a monitor account and looking at this data is you'll know if there is no data. And that is okay. If there is no data, that actually means that Google is not enforcing this against you. And that might be, they might not be enforcing it yet. You might not classify as a bulk sender. We watch and work with hundreds of thousands of domains. And as we said, we were looking at about 12,000 domains as a sample as we're working through this. Not everyone has this data. So if you don't see the data, that doesn't mean, oh, wait, what's going on? That actually is a good thing. That means that Google hasn't put you on their list yet. And that's also part of this too, is Google has said this. They've been clear about this. They're not uniformly enforcing this everywhere quite yet, but they're ramping this up. They've been a little vague in how they're working through that, but they are going to continue to watch. So if you weren't a bulk sender yet, maybe your Black Friday, Cyber Monday got you over that limit, and now you're going to be a bulk sender. Google has also said once a bulk sender, always a bulk sender. But what you can have confidence in is they're putting these rejection codes or these deferral codes into your DMARC reports. You can use something like Valimail to tell you if you're now on Google's radar, and it'll help you track down things if you do need to find additional information. So my answer to folks is if you looked in Monitor and you said, I don't see any data, that's actually okay. I will encourage you though, make sure you put it onto the 6-month view because you might not see data. It defaults to the first week. That doesn't mean you didn't have some signals or some warnings from way back when. So look at that full view of 6 months of data.
And that's our sender requirements failure report. There's a link to the help article there. We'll put these links in the email that we send, the follow-up email as well. Here's links to a whole bunch of other information too about those specific updated bulk sender requirements and the updated enforcement, enhanced enforcement, and a lot of other good stuff that you might want to know here as you try to grow your own knowledge base around this sort of thing. Before we go, I will answer this one last question here really quickly. Karina asked, I work for a nonprofit that uses HubSpot on a shared IP. Our domain's SPF success rate on Google Postmaster is very low. Not sure how to fix this. I'm not sure you have to fix it. I think you need to check into that a little bit deeper, Karina, and see HubSpot by default is going to set their own return path domain with their own automatically populated stuff. There's a common misunderstanding when it comes to SPF that it always has to align. That it's, in other words, if you're sending from HubSpot and maybe you're sending from Karina.com and but the return path, the SPF domain says HubSpot email.com, you're not going to show up as Karina.com passing SPF on Google Postmaster. That is okay as long as it is passing on under HubSpot email.com or whatever domain they're setting up, and you're having some form of alignment. In other words, you set up DKIM for your custom domain. So that's the most important thing for a lot of these email service providers, whether it be MailChimp, Aweber, HubSpot, whatever else. When you are on shared IP infrastructure, a lot of these are going to have their own SPF settings for their own domain and not going to let you customize the SPF record with your own domain. That's okay as long as everything else passes. There's an Ask Al video that I put out a while ago that explains that lack of SPF alignment is not failure. And how does that all work specifically with email service providers? Feel free to reach out and I'll send you a link to that video, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
And let me just pile
And
on real quick on that one, Al, is again,
absolutely.
you just want to be when you're looking at these requirements, I want to be clear on this. You have to have certain things in place in passing, but there is a difference when you're talking about alignment. So there are some nuances in all of this. What Al just said, 100% correct. You're going to be asked, so let's make sure you've got DKIM in place, other things in place. So those are going to be the areas that you can focus on. And Al, do you want to answer? I know that there's a couple other questions in the chat. I also realize we're coming up on time. So you tell me what's the best way to go through this?
We are way over time. Let's just let's wrap things up here. I'll be happy to follow up with people if you want to drop me an email. I will say, hey, somebody's asking, do you recommend having your DMARC policy quarantine or reject? Should it be enabled that way always? And reframe that. I want you to go to DMARC P equals reject. I want you to be able to block failed authentication check mail at the door, at the border. Don't let it through. There might be reasons where you need to go to quarantine because of you're worried about some sort of failure, or you want to be able to look at stuff in a quarantine folder. But I think for most people, if you're asking what is the one size fits most, I would love to see people go to reject. Scott, do you have an opinion on quarantine versus reject?
So we usually will walk you through it, and just to be clear, don't just put it at reject because Al just said reject. This is why you'd use something like monitor. You go and look at what messages or streams are potentially not configured properly. That's why you start at a p equals none. Get all of those things pulled together. When you look at your messages and everything's authenticating, I would recommend that you could skip quarantine and go straight to reject. Some folks like to have quarantine in place just for a little bit of time in case there's a new mail stream that came through or they haven't seen it before. Because if you go to reject, that mail stream won't start in the spam folder somewhere. It's going to be rejected. So there are some advantages from time to time to maybe take a peek at quarantine or go through a quarantine phase. But to Al's point, and 100% aligned with that, is you should be at reject because we are all aware of the humans we are sending to. Humans, for whatever reason, love to go find that junk folder. And if all you're doing is saying, you know what, if it didn't pass DMARC, throw it in the junk folder, you're not protecting your brand. You're not protecting your users. You leave that door open for them to go think they're finding something, being smart, being smarter than the system, and clicking on links they shouldn't click on.
Thank you, Scott. Scott, thank you so much for your help today. I had a lot of fun. I hope everybody in the audience, I hope you enjoyed this as well. I welcome your feedback. Feel free to drop me an email at al.iverson@valimail.com. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Sorry if I didn't get to every question there. Like I said, feel free to email me. I'll be happy to follow up with you. Take care, everyone.